At my family's cabin in Harrison Valley, Pennsylvania from October 8th to the 11th, 2021. My experience started on Friday evening, the 8th, when my girlfriend and I got to the cabin around 8 p.m. As we parked, we noticed a bunch of deer in the yard. I turned on the car's high beams to get a better look at them. After going inside, I grabbed a spotlight and scanned the yard. That's when I spotted two sets of bright red eyes moving toward the field. It was nothing like I'd ever seen before. I've been an outdoorsman, hunting and fishing since I was 8, so I know my wildlife. Later, I was sitting on the balcony, still trying to figure out what I'd seen, when I heard branches snapping. The whole time I had this weird, creepy feeling like I was being watched, something I'd never felt at the cabin before. The next day, October 9th, I was outside on the porch when I heard a pack of coyotes howling. In the 10 years we'd had the cabin, that was a first. Then I started hearing branches snapping from all around me, and again, that feeling of being watched hit me hard. I also noticed what looked like a long footprint by the cabin window. It wasn't clear enough to say for sure it was Bigfoot, but it added to the mystery. On October 11th, around 9:30 a.m., there was a strange amount of deer in the yard, acting skittish. Using my rifle scope, I scanned the area to see what might be causing it. At the top of the field by the tree line, I noticed something tall. At first, I thought it was a bear, common in the area, but then I realized it was standing straight up, and the head was shaped more like a human's. Looking through the scope, I could see indentations for its eye sockets. It was massive. As I watched, I got the feeling it knew I was watching just as I knew it was seeing me. It slowly moved its head, scanning the area. Then, I heard 4 distinct whistles from the back of the property. That's when I noticed a second Sasquatch not far from the first. The second one was quieter, trying to stay hidden while moving through the bushes, but eventually it too sat down. I watched them for about 30 minutes in awe. Our property has a big pond, lots of cover, and plenty of food, which made it a perfect spot for them. When it was time for us to leave, I decided to let them be and head out. It was an encounter I'll never forget. A buddy and I were camping on his family's land near Catawissa, just the two of us out there late at night. We were hanging out by the campfire, talking about who knows what, when we realized we needed more wood to keep the fire going. Nearby, there was this old apple orchard, so we figured we'd go grab some dead wood from the ground. The night was well lit with the moon, so we could see pretty clearly. The moment we stepped into the orchard, we heard this weird screeching or wheezing noise from about 100 yards away, or at least that's what it seemed like. We didn't think much of it, having heard strange noises around there before, so we just kept moving. But just a few steps in, everything changed. There was this god-awful scream, like something with 2 or 3 heads was making it. We both looked in the direction of the noise and froze. About 50 yards away, there it was. A creature about 5'6" but bulky, maybe 350 to 400 pounds. It started charging at us, and man, it was fast. We didn't waste a second turning on our heels and sprinting for the car. As soon as we hit the clearing, the creature stopped and turned away. We didn't need any more convincing. We put out the fire and got out of there as fast as we could. Thinking back, about a month before this happened, we found a deer all mangled up in the clearing. It wasn't eaten or anything, just brutally attacked. Back then we brushed it off, but now it felt like a warning. Stay away from its territory. And just a week before this encounter, we noticed all the windows on the shed had been smashed, and this odd smell was lingering around. We figured it might have been vandals, but it could have been something else. Those strange noises around the orchard and pond, we always ignored them as regular wildlife, but now I'm not so sure. It was January 1979, and I was visiting friends at their farm in Cambria County, just outside Patton, Pennsylvania. They'd just butchered one of their beef cattle, and I was helping with wrapping up the meat. Their farm was set on top of a ridge, accessible only by a gravel and dirt lane winding half a mile through the woods. My mom had told me that if I wanted a ride home, I needed to meet her at the bottom of their lane by 7 p.m., as she was coming back from town. With all the snow and ice, you couldn't make it up their lane without a four-wheel drive. But, like a typical teenager not checking the clock, I stayed too late, and it was around 9:30 p.m. when my friend's dad offered me a ride to my uncle's house. My friends were poking fun at me for needing help, so I stubbornly declined. I'd walked home plenty of times at night, whatever the season. They handed me a knapsack with a few steaks as a thank you for helping, and a big metal flashlight, not really necessary since the snow brightened up the path under the full moon. As I left their house, I picked up on a weird smell in the air, like stale armpits or dirty socks. I shrugged it off as something from their coal furnace. Walking down the lane, I felt uneasy, like someone was watching me, and every hair on my neck stood straight up. Glancing back toward the farmhouse, I saw, about 80 to 100 yards away, this huge, dark, hairy figure standing by the raised edge of their pond. It didn't move, but I swear it was staring right at me. Even though we were far apart, it felt like we were just a room away from each other. Panic took over, and without really thinking, I decided to make a break for it, sprinting down the lane to put some distance between us. As I ran, I started hearing crashes from an old logging road about 200 feet to my left in the woods. The noise matched my pace, and when I slipped on some ice, I was sure it would catch up to me. Reaching the end of the lane, the sounds finally disappeared, but I kept running those last 3/4 of a mile to my uncle's house, not slowing down. I banged on the door, and as soon as it opened, I stumbled inside and passed out. My uncle and aunt asked what was wrong, but I was too scared to tell them, worried they'd just laugh it off. Years passed, and one day, while watching an episode of In Search Of, they showed the Patterson Bigfoot film. That's when it hit me. Without a doubt, that was the same creature I saw that night. I'm certain about it. It wasn't a man, a black bear, or a deer. When we locked eyes, I knew it was something intelligent, something conscious, not just another wild animal. I've lived in the country all my life, seen all sorts of animals at all hours, but nothing like this. I live in a pretty remote part of Adams County, Pennsylvania, near the Michaud State Forest, close to Tick-Tock and Pine Ridge Lane. The forest is mostly white pines and oak, with loads of mountain laurel and rhododendron everywhere. One morning, I woke up early. The weather was just right, no wind and a cool, crunchy ground. As I walked the half mile or so to a spot where I'd seen deer tracks, everything felt perfect. In the darkness, about 200 yards from my stand, I suddenly heard a noise that stopped me in my tracks. It was a howl like nothing I'd ever heard before. My mind raced to explain it away, maybe a wild dog or a coyote. Shaking off the fear, I kept going. Once I was settled in my tree stand, daylight broke, and the woods around me started waking up. Not long after sunrise, I heard deer crashing through the laurel. 4 does barreled past, about 15 yards away, clearly spooked by something. I barely had time to process that when I heard more crunching footsteps coming my way. Expecting a buck, I readied my bow. But the sound was different, more deliberate, like it meant business. That's when I saw flashes of brown hair moving through the thick laurel. This wasn't a deer. What emerged was a massive bipedal creature, standing 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in matted hair. It ran right past me, never slowing down. I was processing this when even more movement caught my eye. 2 more of these creatures were coming quickly. They stopped briefly, and I got a good look. One was smaller, pulling along a little baby Bigfoot. They took off again, clearly following the bigger one. After the forest settled back into its normal quiet, I sat there trying to wrap my head around what I'd just seen. I was terrified, and the air was filled with a foul, garbage like smell they left behind. Eventually, I gathered the courage to climb down from the tree and make my way back home. I haven't dared to return to that spot since, but I've seen other signs of Bigfoot activity around here. I can't shake the feeling that this area might just be crawling with them.